Welcome to another another episode of the People Productivity Channel. Today, I have a very interesting interview that I think you're going to love. It's with Charles Araujo. We'll get into that in a minute. But remember, this channel is designed to create a better future for you. In every one of our episodes, we give specific tips, ideas, and things that you can do to ensure that your future is better. So, Charles Araujo is the founder of the Institute for Digital Transformation, and he's most recently started a really good newsletter. The digitization of work and life, as you know, started back in April 1964 with the introduction of the mainframe. Business started to use it. It was a standard. Everything began to get digitized, and it's brought us to where we are today, where things are speeding up faster and faster than ever before. We are actually on the verge of everything as a service, and in this new world, how we create personal business value is going to be fully transformed. Charles' new digital transformation service is really interesting. I think you should stay tuned. This is going to be a great interview. And Charles, without further ado, please just do a quick introduction, buddy.
Sure. Thanks, Frank. It's such a pleasure to be with you here and with your audience. So my background, at the end of the day, I'm an IT guy at my core, and I'll kind of spare all the gory details of it. But I ended up writing a book about 6, 7 years ago now called The Quantum Age of IT: Why Everything You Know About IT is About to Change. And ironically, what it really changed was my personal trajectory. Up to that point, I'd been a consultant, and I had actually run technical operations for about $1 billion healthcare firm 20 some odd years ago. So I'd really been on the buy side of the enterprise IT kind of desk. And now suddenly I'm getting all these invitations to speak all over the world about the future of IT and what it meant to be a leader in that future. And that led about 5 years ago to a speaking tour through New Zealand, where one of the events I was speaking at was something called the Digital Disruption Conference. And unique for me at the time, it was a non-IT audience. It was hosted by the Auckland University of Technology and the US Embassy. And it was sort of their answer to TED Talks. It was the business elite of Auckland had come together to figure out where the world was going. And so I realized I couldn't really talk about IT transformation. These weren't IT people. And so it caused me to step back and ask how these forces that I've been researching and writing about and talking about, how they were actually affecting the broader world outside of IT. And so that's what led me to focus on what we now call digital transformation. But at the time, it was just this recognition that we were entering this new period of time in which the fundamental ways that organizations were structured, managed, and led were in fact changing. That was underpinned by technology, but that it was really about this business transformation that was occurring. And of course, I think it was in that period that you and I met, because I knew you were
Yes.
very much in that exact same kind of line of thought. And so it sort of started me on this journey. And so I've really spent the last 5 years, I put on an analyst hat as well. So I'm an industry analyst in addition. But I've been exploring this and trying to figure out, well, where's this all going? And it's led me to what I hope we're going to talk about today, which is this idea that we see two macro trends that are intersecting and merging that are fundamentally going to change everything about it, what it means to folks like you and me, to all of us really, that are, whether we're enterprise leaders or individual contributors, because it's going to dramatically affect what it means to work in the enterprise as we go forward. So that's really kind of my story.
Yeah, you've been, you've had a really fascinating career, and you have been actually driving, kind of waking people up around the need to digitally transform with your Institute for Digital Transformation, your book, your speaking circuit that you've been on. I'm really impressed with the energy and zeal that you've taken to this. Seriously. And this new
Thank you.
newsletter, is dynamite. I signed up. I love it. Oh, by the way, why don't you tell people how to sign up for that?
Absolutely. So
Before
I
we get
appreciate, yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's called Your Digital Future, and you can get it at charlesaraujo.com. I know there'll be a link, but it's, my last name is spelled ARAUJO. .com, and then you'll see a link there, but you can also go / your digital future, and you'll get to the landing page where I explain everything about it. It is free during this launch period. I don't know exactly when, but when I'm satisfied that we're kind of hitting critical mass, this is something that I'm going to charge a fee for. I believe the information is that valuable, but for anybody who signs up now until that happens, it will be free forever. So I encourage folks to sign up now while the getting is good.
Yeah, I tell you what, the digital era is going to impact people in so many ways they can't even imagine it. And even having predicted that there would be everything as a service as far back as 2010, I was giving a talk about this. And those were the early days. Most people, including me, didn't realize how quickly this was going to take place. I think everyone needs to understand their digital future. And, let's just get into it because this really matters. This is going to have an impact on people. You talk about a lot of different things like the market of one. Why is this something that, our listeners should care about, Charles?
So it's part of this larger macro trend that I've been kind of observing, and that this isn't, I think what we're really seeing is it's not like I'm the person that is I created all these things. But what I think is interesting is just observing how they're coming together. So this I call it the primacy of the customer. And here's the big message that in the industrial age, the way we created value was we were producing mass products for a mass market. And so the way you created value in that circumstance was to optimize that process, what I call optimizing the core. But it was all about supply chains, and it was the Mad Men syndrome of how we marketed in TV and all these new mediums that were coming about in the 50s. That whole process, right? And that's how we created value. What we found though is as we came to this period of digital disruption that, depending on how you want to count it, 10 to 15 years ago, these people were disrupting these longstanding industries and organizations, not because they out optimized these industries or these big companies, because they transformed the customer experience. And that's the real big driver. So when we talk about things like the market of one or the experience economy or any of these terms, what we're really saying is it is now us as the consumer that is in control. We're the ones that have the power now. Whereas in the past, it was really, sorry.
Hey,
Can you,
live interview,
I know, there we go. The joy of living in New York City. But in the past, the company, the famous line from Henry Ford back in the early days was, customers can have any color they want as long as it's black. Can you imagine a company trying to say that today? It would just not
No,
happen because
no.
we have so much choice, so much control, so much information. And so that's really and so I actually am calling this the idea, the digital experience supply chain. That in the industrial age, we needed a supply chain that delivered our value, right? It was this optimized model of delivering a mass product to a mass market. And in the digital era, we need a digital experience supply chain that is really about how do we create, curate, and sustain this differentiated customer experience. And then that means we have to continually transform our business models, operating models, and the nature of work itself to deliver it. And so that's really where I see all of this going, and why it's bigger than I think even people who are talking about the quote unquote customer experience are sort of missing the true ramification of what this means.
So knowing that, what should people think about in terms of their own future then?
Well, so the very first thing is if you spend all of your energy and time within an organization internally focused, then you probably have a challenge. And that doesn't mean, I'm not trying to say that these internally focused things aren't important. They are. They're vitally important. But they're only important to the extent that they help an organization drive that differentiated customer experience, right? So in the industrial age, if I could wring amount of efficiency out of a business process, that was literally money that dropped straight to the bottom line. And we see the vestiges of that today with call centers that are all designed about optimizing.
Oh, yeah,
But what they
calendar check.
create, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But what do they create? A horrific customer experience. And so what we're going to see is that flipping around. Now, I actually am advocating that leaders and individuals within organizations, even if your top leadership hasn't figured this out yet and they aren't transforming their organizations around it, you need to start changing your mindset to prepare, because this day is coming and it's coming fast. And and basically, if your organization is too slow to figure this out, then your organization is not going to be around. So you're still going to need these skills to get the next job. So, I mean, I think this is something that is impacting everyone, and it's a mindset shift of recognizing how does what I do every moment of the day affect the customer experience, and then using that as a pivot point to start improving the things I'm doing to drive that value.
So maybe they should think about whether the job they do today would even it exist in a fully transformed digital enterprise.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the other sort of big trend here that I'm sort of observing is what I call the primacy of the algorithm. And that is that during the industrial age, we were, again, all about optimization. The industrial barons effectively needed robots. They needed to produce reliably, consistently. They didn't have robots. So what did they do? They trained generations of humans to be the robots. And most of our industrial age constructs are still based on those principles that are literally 150 years old and are woefully out of touch with I know you live this every day, right? So I
Yep.
mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but that is a massive gap right now. And so what we're reaching this tipping point where organizations and the technology is getting to the point that the robots are coming back for their job. The algorithms are now reaching the point where they can do all of these mundane activities and tasks. And so I completely agree with you. There's a whole bunch of jobs that are going to go away, but more what we're going to see is that jobs are going to be transformed because all of this minutia, all of this routine activity is in fact going to be automated, and the driver of value are going to be the things that only humans can do and things that are driving to that customer experience or maybe the partner experience or the employee experience, right? But it's all going to be experiential, and that's going to be where the human value kind of equation works out.
Yeah. I mean, this is happening just absolutely so fast. And, I was amazed at how quickly Microsoft was able to become a digital enterprise. It wasn't long. You'd wrestle with them over a enterprise license agreement to go install everything. And suddenly you turn around and they did make successful transition to going on demand. Imagine how many companies are stuck, not able to transform themselves.
I think it's an interesting case, having spent a little bit of time working with some of the folks at Microsoft on two fronts. One is that is an absolute testament to the power of leadership, right? Of crafting a vision for the future and demanding that the organization pivots around that vision. I think that's the success that Microsoft is having is there. Where I think Microsoft is also sometimes an example of is that having talked to some folks, they're still massive cultural challenges, and they'll admit
Yeah.
this, right? Because they're a big organization, and any large organization has a massive challenge in front of them. It's not something that happens overnight, and so it is about transforming the culture. It's been fascinating in having some purview over the last few years of seeing that shift happen, continually evolving, right? And so I think the power of culture is important, but the other thing I think is really really critical that I'm a huge proponent of is that it's not enough to come from the top, from the leadership to plant this vision. Individuals have to take ownership of their own destiny and start preparing themselves for this future.
What could they do to do that?
Well, so here's where I think this all ends up. In
Yeah.
fact, this is the subject of my hopefully upcoming book. I say hopefully because I need to write the darn thing, but it's called The New Human Age.
I've been
In fact,
talking about getting my second book out for years, and I play around with a chapter and stuff. It is time consuming.
it well, and the more successful you become and people are drawn it's really hard to find that because writing a book, if you've never done it, it just takes so much focus, so much energy,
Killer.
yeah, so I wrote the first three and before things kind of got crazy, and so I actually had a fourth book completely scoped out, threw it out because it just took too long and wasn't right, and so I've been working on this one, and I'm actually going to be producing this sort of live. In fact, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be producing as part of the Your Digital Future newsletter or journal is actually going to be ending up in the book, right? So I'm sort of doing this dynamically as I go. But where I landed is this: is that in the end, what's going to be driving value are these very human characteristics, things like creativity, imagination, empathy, the things that we are not going to be able to automate anytime in the near future, and that are going to be uniquely human and will therefore become the things that create value, right? See, right now, technology is still a differentiator because
Yeah.
it's unique and what have you. But what's going to happen is that organizations are going to continue to produce better technology and it's going to continue to get more normalized. So unless you're an actual technology company, and I've never bought the stuff that everyone's a tech company, right? Unless that's your actual business, the technology itself becomes normalized. And so the value is going to be those human characteristics, right? And so how do we prepare ourselves? Well, we have to become as individuals more creative, more imaginative, more empathetic. The challenge is, as you well know, the industrial age found that those traits were actually not very good for business. They introduced variability. They introduced things that we didn't want if we were trying to optimize. And so we've largely taught people to check them at the door. I used to run an informal survey where I'd ask IT people, it's like, how many of you do something artistic on the side, play an instrument, write poetry, whatever. And it was staggering the number of people that raised their hand. And
Yeah.
yet you talk to them inside the bounds of an enterprise and they're as uncreative as they come. And it's like, well, how do these connect, right? And it's because we've learned to check these skills at the door and they don't belong at work. And so what we actually need to do is rediscover them, release them, and uncover that. And so that's really what a lot of where the work is ending up. So I have a framework called ACE, or it stands for awareness, curiosity, and engagement, because it's really hard to tell someone to go be creative, but I can teach someone to become more aware, to be more curious, to be more engaged intellectually and collaboratively. And so these are the elements that I think we can start embedding into our teams, into our individual work practices. And then my wife and I are actually launching another organization called the MAPS Institute, because there's another level even deeper than that, which is just getting in touch with sort of who you are, what you want out of life, so that you can sort of get out of your own way as you're trying to foster these skills that are going to help you professionally.
Yeah, and maybe actually do something that you enjoy, if it's
Yeah,
possible to make money out of it.
absolutely.
Quite
Well,
on.
and I think there's also something to be said for the fact that you can find enjoyment in a lot of things if you understand where your joy comes from. And that's part of this process as well. I know for me, and having spent most of my career within large enterprises, either directly or as a consultant, it's so easy to just get consumed by all of the the gunk and the politics and the stuff, and there are so many opportunities to find tremendous points of joy, of engagement with other really smart people, and all of these things. You just have to. I really think there's a personal perspective that you have to bring to that.
Yeah, and I look, I find the future of work incredibly exciting. Who wants to actually sit around doing mundane, repetitive work? Please let the machines take that work over. Let's work on the fun, creative stuff. Let's build deep relationships. Let's work on turning concepts into reality. I mean, this is what the fun is all about. And that's why I love your digital future.
What I do think is interesting about that statement, though, is I think there are definitely those of us where all in 100%. I actually think there's a spectrum, though, and I think that for a lot of people, to varying degrees, there's also a degree of fear that engenders. Because if my job is to take this glass and move it from point A to point B, I know what that looks like. I can measure it, right? When my job is now to be creative, to be innovative, right? That's a lot harder to measure. It's a whole lot harder to judge. Am I doing a good job or not? If I'm, did my creation make sense? Right. I remember I tried to give a speech years ago called Learning to Fail. And the conference organizers were so afraid no one would show up that they changed the name to some stupid thing like The Secret of Success or something, right? Because I actually believe you have to learn, we have to break through all this, right? To learn how to take that risk and take that chance and recognize that it doesn't mean that the end of the world when it hasn't worked, right? But for a lot of people, this is going to be a really scary proposition to take all of that stuff that they're used to doing every day. They know how to do, they know how to do it well, and now suddenly we've automated it and they're left with having to create and innovate and engage with people on a human level. And that's what drives value. There is a lot of work to be done here, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's an enormous amount of work to be done, and it occurs at the level of the individual contributor who's got to learn to work in a very effective way with others. And although that always mattered in IT, it didn't always matter in companies and certainly wasn't valued.
Right.
I could say in very few companies was it ever really valued because nobody ever spent any time building skills in those areas, right? It was
Right.
the
Exactly.
industrial, the halo of the industrial era. But this whole notion of, your digital future and disruption is so fascinating. And I think the notion of, companies and leaders and how they transform and lead to disruption is something, every leader has to embrace and actually every individual embrace. Maybe we could chat about that, leading in an era of disruption. What are your thoughts there, Charles?
So I think a couple of things. Really, the very first thing is what I just talked about. That if you're a leader and you're leading these teams, you have to start with recognizing that there's going to be a lot of scared people, right? We're sort of throwing out the rule book, right? All the things you knew, you showed up on time, you did your job or whatever. And even those that have been in knowledge work where we had a little bit more freedom, there was still a lot of that mentality, right? And now we suddenly start throwing that out, and that ends up creating chaos and a little bit of uncertainty. And so you're going to have a bunch of scared people. And so the very first thing is you have to help by crafting a vision of the future that they can see themselves in. right? To help assuage some of that fear, that this isn't about them being out on the streets, about, everything, their life as they know it being over. Because I don't believe that. I think there's so much opportunity, so much that's going to happen. So that's the first part. But it's also about being honest with them that says, hey, the job you're doing, if it's a highly repetitive job, we're probably not going to, it's not going to look the same. Yeah. It's either going away or it's going to change dramatically. So we have to both be honest and authentic, but also craft this vision of the future that they can see themselves in some way. And then beyond that, I think there's three specific things, and I boil all these up or down, however you want to say it, into this idea of the transformation of identities. I think for most of us, we identify ourselves in a specific role or function. We identify ourselves by what we do.
Mhm.
And when what you do then changes, what it actually causes is an identity crisis. And so we have to give people a new identity, and an identity that's a little bit more ephemeral, one that is connected to outcomes, not to a function. And so the three elements that I think as a leader that you can help your team create this new identity around is, the first being a visionary. And a visionary is not what it sounds like. I mean, when I started speaking several years ago, people started calling me a futurist, and I made a joke about it. I used to carry around a crystal ball. It's still actually right below my desk here, right? And it said, because I don't know the future, it's like, here, try this. Um, but what I came to really learn is the futurist isn't someone who knows what the future is going to hold. A future is simply somebody who's in a constant state of exploration about the future. And so this idea of being a visionary is that everyone in your organization, if you're a leader, needs to be in that state where we are constantly throwing off the shackles of this is how we've always done things, and to be free. And this is where the curiosity and the awareness come into it, right? To constantly explore, well, what might the future hold? And if that future happens, how's that going to affect what we're doing today? And does that create an opportunity for us to get ahead of that in some way? So that's the first part. The second is a designer, right? So there's this whole movement around design thinking. It's been around for a very long time. I'm a huge, huge fan. If you're not familiar with it, you should go check out the work by IDEA or the Stanford D School, Design School,
Mhm.
doing some fabulous work in this space. But it's really about this customer-centric view of the world, right? Whenever I'm creating something, where is the customer in this and how are they experiencing this? And so it's a very powerful shift because, again, for most especially if you're somewhere deep in the bowels of our organization and you're nowhere near a quote unquote customer, it's easy to forget this. And I think for anybody, no matter where you are, you have to have this sort of designer mentality of, who is my customer? How is this impacting them? And how do I therefore design everything I'm doing around it? Which leads to the last form of identity, which is this idea of being an owner, that everyone needs to have the sense that I am in control of my own destiny, and I take ownership for everything that I produce. And I think it's kind of interesting. One of the things I love most about like the DevOps movement within IT, for example, is that it starts creating this sense of ownership mentality. A developer can't just create code and throw it over the wall, right? But how often do we see that in every other part of the organization where
Pull
people
over.
do something, yeah, and they just throw it
All
over the wall,
They don't own the end result. I own
right?
my little piece here. Here it is.
And so when we start thinking about an owner, that I have an ownership stake in whatever it is we're producing, that sense of identity starts transforming the way we look at everything we do. So if I'm a leader today, those are the things that I'm focusing on.
So visionary, I love that because, without any vision, obviously you don't really know where you're going, right? And this is a whole loss of strategic trust and across the organization because people go, what is our future? Am I going to be safe
Right.
here? So
Right.
it's really, really super important. And I think leaders in particular have to help create that vision and engage everybody in it. And, any thoughts in that area on leaders helping drive vision in companies?
It's to me it's a bit of a mixed bag. I completely agree with you. But I would argue that the leader's most important job is to give the folks on their team and within their organization the permission to co-create the vision.
Mhm.
I think the days of going out and having a small team spend weeks in offsite planning sessions and crafting this vision and then going out and like it's an ad campaign and rolling it out to the teams, not only is it not going to work from an organizational change perspective, it's misguided. The greatest asset that most organizations have when they're dealing with all this disruption are the people on the ground closest to the point of experience, the point of engagement with the customer, to understand what customers' expectations are today, how they're shifting, how they're changing, where the experiential gaps are, all of
Yep.
those things.
Yep.
It happens really deep in the organization. And so giving them an opportunity to co-create the vision of the future based on their knowledge. If
Yeah.
you don't harness that, you're missing a massive opportunity.
Yeah, totally. And, I totally agree with you at the end of the day. It's going to be about engaging the organization and creating that vision of the future. I can't tell you how many times one of these big consulting firms would come into, a company I was at, executive across companies, and they'd have they'd be charged with coming up with the strategy.
Yep.
And they really didn't know how the place worked, actually. And they'd come up with these ideas and, usually very hard to implement, or in fact, they would go around, it's a famous read the watch, talk to everybody, collect some ideas, put them out there. But what they never did was really engage the whole place. The people who
Right.
worked with the customers knew the products, services, the infrastructure, and have them come together to come up with the vision. So you're on the money. More than ever, they're going to have to engage everybody in what that future looks like.
Well, and what's interesting, getting back to why these core skills are so important, what I would argue, and look, I've been in that, I've done that, literally. I mean, I'm guilty of being the consultant that was brought in to craft the strategy. And it's a great ego rush, right? It's like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
so smart. I'm the one that's brought in from the outside. They're paying you all this money or whatever to go and create the strategy. I get it. But what it's missing, what I missed, right? This is, I mean, I'm not, even though I'm talking about it, this doesn't mean I have this all licked, right?
Yeah.
What that is missing is empathy, right? The empathy to understand it, right? How do you get empathy? Well, it starts by listening, right? And so getting out into the field as close as you can. I remember I was running a project for 3 years in Washington D.C., and so I was in D.C. all the time, and I stayed at the same hotel. Became great friends with the general manager of the hotel. And one night he was a wine fan as well, Frank, and so he was
Yeah.
plying me with free wine because we'd sit there and drink, and he learned what I did, and he's lamenting, and he just like unloads on me like I can fix his IT
Oh,
problems for him somehow.
yeah.
um, but he said really prophetic words to me. He says, Charlie, if the IT department would just come and spend one day with me here at the hotel, they would understand how hard they make it for me to deliver a great guest experience. Right?
Yeah.
That empathy of just getting out and listening as the starting point for anything else you're going to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That is so important. What is the actual customer experience? What do they care about? And how does the company and the culture and all of the things inside that corporation make that better?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
then we get down to this whole notion of design thinking, which ties directly into that, which is so important. And let's talk about that some more because it really, really does matter. And when anybody is considering any design changes or products or services, getting that, designing the customer into the middle of it is just so important, right?
It is, and I don't hold myself out as a design thinking expert, but what I will say this is that it's a lot harder than we think because there's something called the curse of knowledge. I wrote about it in my first book. It was coined by a Stanford researcher, and the basic premise is that once you know something, it becomes very difficult to unknow it. And the problem is that whenever we create anything, we know it intimately.
Mhm.
And so it's very difficult for us to then suddenly put ourselves in a position where we can imagine somebody who's experiencing what we've created for the very first time without any context, without any knowledge of what that is. And by the way, that whether this is a piece of software, whether this is an experience in a store, right? Imagine if you're a retail designer and you walk in, you've created all this, you know where everything is, you know what it's meant to represent. It's impossible for you to walk into that and experience it the same way a customer walking in fresh from the street the first time would be. So it doesn't matter what you're creating, service, product, doesn't matter. You need to find somebody else who doesn't have that curse of knowledge to
Yeah.
experience it for you, and then to as dispassionately as you can observe, right? Observe them experiencing that process, and so that becomes the foundation. And then I think the other problem that people make when it comes to design thinking is they go into it with this idea that they want to understand the solutions. They want design is this action verb. We're going to design something.
Yeah.
But the very first step of design thinking is questioning, is questions. It's understanding the questions that need to be answered for the customer to have a positive experience with this. rather than the solution, right? The solution comes afterward. And so I think, those would just be, and again, I would say, go check out what, the Stanford D School is doing. And IDEO has a blog that talks about a lot of this stuff. Focus on, that there are people that know so much more about this than I do, but bringing this right mindset that it's not about, being better at creating, it's really about listening and observing.
And actually, for everybody to just understand this really matters, even if they're not going to ultimately be the designer, to just understand this entire movement and what the digital future is. I remember a famous quote, we should all care about the future because we have to live there.
Right.
And,
Exactly.
and it really is, this is what it comes down to. This stuff is all going to be very important. You're not going to be an expert at all of it, maybe just one little thing, but
Yeah.
understanding the big picture, is really important. And this whole notion of ownership, I mean, what could be more important than people taking ownership and not actually saying, all right, I got this little piece, I'm going to do it, and then I don't have to worry about anything,
Yeah.
which you see in companies today. So let's talk about that a little bit more.
Well, what I think is what it's very closely tied to is another thing that I'm very passionate about. So people, customer experience, sort of like digital transformation, has become another buzzword. And the frustration I have is that people have associated the term customer experience with buying experience. And it isn't, right? Especially, to your point, is everything as a service. That means everyone is in a constant buying state. They're constantly buying, evaluating, consuming, buying value. And so when we talk about the customer experience, what we're really talking about is their experience with the organization throughout their journey, through every step and every interaction. And this is where I think a lot of people, if you're running an internal type function, you think, well, I have nothing to do with the customer experience. Hogwash, you do. So when this idea of ownership means at some point, everything you do impacts a customer in some way, whether that is because you are part of the supply chain that delivers that product to them, or whether it's because you're part of invoicing or the back end, right? That it can
Mhm.
eventually impact them. And I'll give you just two quick examples of this, and it ties this idea of ownership. This is the opening of one of my keynotes now. I recently wanted to buy a wireless headset, right? The Apple AirPods have normalized it where it now is no longer totally weird to walk around with these things sticking out your ears. So I
Yeah.
I
So
needed to have something, right? And so I decided I was going to get the Sony version. There's this horrible brand name, I can't remember, something 1000 X3 or something, but um, I decided I wanted to buy them locally here in Manhattan where I live, rather than ordering them online like I do everything. So I went to a website. I name it during my keynote, but just I won't name them here. But this company, you can probably figure it out. And I looked online and said, oh, they have a store here, Upper West Side. They're in stock.
great. Oh my
Awesome.
God, I got to run over there.
And that's exactly what I did. I'm literally walking, like speed walking down the streets of Manhattan to go to get it. I find the display where it is, and they have the little display box, and then underneath where there should be, I'm like, there's nothing there. So I go and I find a sales associate, and I just like drag her over there. I'm like, I can't even speak. And I just point, and I go, ah. And she goes, oh, well, somebody received our digital order by accident, but we don't actually receive that shipment until next Thursday. And I was flying out the next day for a speaking gig, and I was so just PO'd about it, right? And so I walked home all dejected. I got halfway through my walk home, I cheered up because I realized I now had the opening for my new keynote. But
Yeah, yeah.
I but the reality is, so this is somebody who looked at this and they thought this was an innocuous thing. Oh, I made a mistake. And I don't know if their system was too cumbersome to back it out, or they just didn't care. But the reality is, it created a horrible customer experience because I have this entire thing. And what did I do? I went home and ordered it from their competitor, got it the next day. And I'm now telling the story to you and on stage. And, this is where people just really don't understand. In this economy, everything matters. Everything matters.
Yeah. I mean, that is a terrible experience, actually, because you end
It
up
really
not
was.
actually having the product they say they have. Um, I've been out trying to get things at the last minute, and yeah, I mean, nothing could be more frustrating than actually going out of your way to get something, and then it's not there, right?
Yep.
So, let's close on maybe the employee experience, which matters in an incredible way here, right? So it's all about this experience, and the partner experience, the customer experience. How about the employee experience?
So, people ask me about this, and I'm very passionate about creating a positive employee experience. And for two reasons. One, this idea of the digital experience supply chain says it's all connected, and I believe that. That meaning, if I'm delivering, so I'll give you another story about an employee experience. So my father, again, I don't know, I must have the T-shirt, it says "Call me with your technology problems," but my father calls me up one day, and he's literally calls me up just to complain about the situation that he had, and it's like, well, how am I supposed to fix this? But he went to the Verizon store. And I don't even remember. He was trying to return something because they'd given him the wrong thing. Whatever. It was an innocuous thing. Um, but the guy that he's working with has his little Verizon tablet, and he's punching all this stuff. And he goes, "Sir, I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about this. I found it here at another store, but I can't. I can't make this transfer work for you. It won't let me do it." So my dad drives out of the store. They're going same thing, using the same tablet. Says, "I'm sorry." Finally, the employee does. You know what? Here, just take it. And it's good for him because it
Yeah,
was the only saving grace. It didn't completely destroy this experience. My dad has because it's a business, I don't know, several $1,000s a month worth of this. And the guy saved it by finally just kind of giving up. But if you deliver a bad employee experience, because, right, I'm sure whoever is owning that app is thinking, well, this isn't
yeah,
customer facing. If your employees can't do the job, especially if they're touching the customer, but anywhere up and down that stream, then you're going to ultimately deliver a bad customer experience. So
totally.
that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is just everything we've been talking about. If value is going to come through creativity, imagination, and empathy, it is really hard to be creative, imaginative, empathetic, not to mention happy and cheerful, if I am screaming at my computer because or my work environment, my cultural environment, any of those things, because they have been poorly designed, right? So if I want to create a great customer experience, I better start by delivering a great employee experience so that my employees, I'm removing every possible barrier that I can from them delivering that great experience. And again, it doesn't matter where you are in the organization because it's all connected. So I think for those two reasons, people need to put a lot more energy into the employee experience.
Yeah, yeah, phenomenal. So I think we'll wrap up now, but I do want to share one thing with my audience. I've known Charles for a while, and I know Charles passed, and I know that Charles, a lot of people talk about the future, and it's always dangerous to get into the realm of saying I'm going to predict the future. But I think, Charles, you've done a really good job over time. And there's
Thank
no
you.
question that this digital future that everybody should worry about is coming very rapidly. I do recommend everybody sign up for the newsletter while you have a chance to get it for nothing. It's going to be very interesting. The first few issues are excellent. So listen, thank you so much for coming on the channel. I don't know if there are any parting thoughts or words of wisdom you want to say for our viewers.
Just I think you just said it. Take it seriously. This is the real stuff. I don't want people to be scared, like building a bunker or anything. That's not what this is about. And in fact, what I see it more than anything is a massive opportunity. We're going to go through a period of substantial change, and those who get it right first are going to be on the winning end of this. And so you want to be on that side of it. So I hope my little newsletter, digital journal, or whatever is helpful in some small way. And so I definitely hope people sign up for it.
So let's end by wishing everybody a great digital future. Thank you so much for coming on. Always fascinating. Look forward to chatting with you again in the near future, buddy.
Thanks, Frank.
Take care.